Why does a narcissist feel pleasure in controlling their victims? This question touches one of the deepest and most uncomfortable truths about human relationships, power, and psychological manipulation. To answer it, we must dive into the inner world of narcissism, a territory where charm masks insecurity, dominance hides fear, and control becomes the main drug that keeps the narcissist alive. At first glance, it may seem simple. A narcissist enjoys control because control gives them power. But this explanation is superficial and incomplete. To understand the real dynamics, we must explore not only the external behavior of the narcissist, but also the inner emptiness that drives them. Their behavior is not random. It follows a pattern deeply rooted in personality structures, childhood wounds, and the human need for significance. Narcissists build their identities on fragile foundations. Deep down, many of them carry wounds of inadequacy, rejection, or neglect. To protect themselves from this unbearable inner pain, they construct a false self, a carefully crafted image of superiority, perfection, and strength. This false self becomes a shield, but it is also a prison. Because it is not real, it constantly requires external validation to survive. Without admiration, attention, and compliance from others, the narcissist feels as though they are disappearing, falling into the abyss of their own fragility. Here lies the first key. Control is the oxygen of the false self. When a narcissist controls their victim, they receive evidence that their illusion of superiority works. The victim's obedience, confusion, or dependence serves as a mirror that reflects back to the narcissist the confirmation, "I matter, I have power, I am not weak." This is why the act of controlling others produces genuine pleasure for them. It is not pleasure in the healthy sense, not joy or fulfillment, but a momentary relief from inner emptiness. To understand this dynamic better, imagine control as a type of psychological currency. Just as some people accumulate wealth to feel secure, narcissists accumulate submission and dominance. Each time they manipulate, confuse, or impose their will, they deposit one more coin into their inner bank of validation. But just like money that constantly flows out, this validation never stays long. Soon the narcissist feels empty again and must seek new ways to regain control. This creates a cycle of constant pursuit, charm, domination, withdrawal, and return. Another crucial factor is the lack of empathy. Narcissists have a reduced capacity or sometimes a complete unwillingness to connect with the emotions of others. They do not see their victims as independent individuals with rights and dignity. Instead, they perceive them as extensions of themselves, tools to be used or trophies to be displayed. Because they struggle to recognize the humanity of others, the suffering of their victims does not generate guilt in the way it would for a balanced person. On the contrary, the victim's dependence or distress may reinforce the narcissist's sense of superiority. For them, another person's vulnerability becomes proof of their own strength. Let us also consider the mechanisms through which control is achieved. A narcissist rarely dominates directly through brute force. Their preferred tools are psychological manipulation, subtle tactics, and emotional games. Among the most common are charm and seduction. At the beginning, they present themselves as attentive, fascinating, and even generous. This creates trust and lowers the victim's defenses. Gaslighting, a method where they make the victim doubt their own memory, perception, or judgment. By rewriting reality, they gain the upper hand. Devaluation and criticism. Once the victim is hooked, the narcissist begins to undermine their confidence through constant criticism, comparisons, or sarcasm. Isolation. They slowly cut the victim off from friends, family, or support networks, ensuring dependence grows. Withdrawal of affection. If the victim resists, the narcissist punishes them with silence, indifference, or abandonment until compliance is restored. Each of these tactics is a lever of control, and every successful use of these levers produces reinforcement for the narcissist's ego. Imagine someone pulling the strings of a puppet and watching it move exactly as desired. For the narcissist, this choreography is intoxicating because it provides evidence of their dominance. But why is this control pleasurable rather than simply necessary? Here is where psychology gives us a deeper insight. The act of domination activates reward circuits in the brain. Studies show that experiences of power and dominance can release dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. In other words, every time the narcissist sees their victim yield, doubt, or obey, their brain registers a small victory that feels chemically rewarding. Over time, this can become addictive, reinforcing the cycle of control-seeking. However, this pleasure is never stable or lasting. Because the narcissist's self-esteem is built on a fragile and artificial structure, no amount of control is ever enough. They may control one victim, but soon they will need to expand their influence, test new limits, or escalate their dominance to feel satisfied again. This is why many victims describe their relationships with narcissists as exhausting and unpredictable. The narcissist's hunger for control has no end. It is also important to highlight the paradox here. While control brings them temporary pleasure, it also deepens their dependency on others. The narcissist believes they are independent and powerful, but in truth, they are enslaved to external validation. Without victims to control, their illusion of superiority collapses. Thus, they are not truly free. They are trapped in a constant need to dominate in order to survive emotionally. This brings us to a reflection that Carl Jung himself hinted at in his work. What we do not confront within ourselves, we project outward. The narcissist does not face their inner fragility, so they project it onto others. They must ensure that someone else carries the role of the weak one, so they can play the role of the strong one. Controlling others is not just about power. It is about refusing to face the shadow of their own inadequacy. Now let us turn to the perspective of the victim. Why does this matter? Because understanding the narcissist's pleasure in control helps victims to free themselves from the illusion that it is my fault or I am too weak. The reality is different. The narcissist's need for control says more about them than about the victim. Their pleasure is not proof of your insignificance, but of their own emptiness. Recognizing this truth is the first step toward liberation. Another affirmation worth repeating is this: their need to control me is not a reflection of my weakness. It is a reflection of their fear. Internalizing this can help break the cycle of self-blame that many victims experience. A narcissist's relationship with control does not operate only at the conscious level. Much of it lies beneath awareness, hidden in unconscious patterns and defense mechanisms developed long before adulthood. To understand why control gives them such profound satisfaction, it is necessary to examine the origins of narcissistic behavior, the psychological wounds that shape it, and the destructive cycles that unfold in relationships. Many narcissists are formed in childhood environments where love was conditional. Some grew up with parents who only offered approval when the child performed well, behaved perfectly, or met unrealistic expectations. Others experienced neglect, abuse, or inconsistent affection. In both cases, the message absorbed was the same. I am not valuable as I am. I must earn attention and love by being special or superior. This belief becomes the seed of the narcissistic mask. The child who learns to equate worth with performance or dominance grows into an adult who fears vulnerability. They cannot risk being rejected again, so they construct a facade of perfection and power. But this facade is fragile. Every time reality threatens to break it, the narcissist feels panic, shame, or rage. To prevent the collapse of their false self, they turn to control as a shield. Controlling others ensures they do not have to face their own weakness. The pleasure they feel is therefore not joy in the pure sense, but relief, the soothing of an old wound. From this perspective, control can be seen as an unconscious survival mechanism. To the narcissist, losing control equals emotional death. Their mind interprets independence in others as abandonment. If a partner or friend has their own thoughts, their own boundaries, or their own life, the narcissist experiences it as a threat to their existence. By keeping others dependent, submissive, or confused, they feel secure. The pleasure that arises from this security is addictive because it temporarily silences the fear of rejection. This explains why narcissists often cycle between idealization and devaluation. In the idealization phase, they shower their target with praise, attention, and affection. This hooks the victim and establishes trust. Once the victim is emotionally invested, the devaluation begins. Criticism, manipulation, and withdrawal. To an outsider, this seems contradictory. But for the narcissist, it is a strategy. Alternating between reward and punishment keeps the victim off balance and easier to control. The unpredictability itself becomes a weapon. Victims often describe the sensation as walking on eggshells, never knowing what will trigger the narcissist's anger or coldness. This psychological instability weakens the victim's confidence and increases dependence on the narcissist's approval. Each moment of submission, whether through silence, apology, or compliance, feeds the narcissist's ego. Their brain registers it as confirmation that they still hold power. The cycle reinforces itself endlessly. It is important to highlight that narcissistic control is not always loud or visible. It can be subtle, disguised as care, advice, or even love. A narcissist might say, "I just want what's best for you," while undermining your independence. They might insist, "You can't trust anyone else but me," planting seeds of isolation. They might position themselves as the only one who truly understands you, while simultaneously eroding your ability to trust your own judgment. This kind of covert manipulation is especially dangerous because it makes victims doubt their instincts. And when you doubt your instincts, you are easier to control. The pleasure the narcissist experiences is proportional to the level of dependency they create. The more the victim bends their will, abandons their individuality, or internalizes the narcissist's version of reality, the more powerful the narcissist feels. This explains why narcissists rarely tolerate strong boundaries. A boundary represents resistance, and resistance threatens their illusion of control. When faced with boundaries, many narcissists react with anger, guilt-tripping, or playing the victim. Their aim is always the same: to dismantle the boundary and restore dominance. From a neurological perspective, every success in controlling others activates reward circuits in the brain. The dopamine released provides a temporary high, similar to the satisfaction a gambler feels when winning a bet. But just like gambling, the effect fades quickly. Soon, the narcissist needs another win, another demonstration of control, another act of submission from their victim. Without it, they feel restless, insecure, and empty. Control becomes not just a preference, but a compulsion. This raises a sobering truth. The narcissist's pleasure in control is inseparable from their pain. The very mechanism that soothes them also enslaves them. Because their false self requires constant validation, they can never rest. They must always be on guard, always manipulating, always ensuring their image is maintained. In this way, they are not only tormentors of others, but also prisoners of their own condition. Their victims may live in chains, but the narcissist is equally bound to the endless need to dominate. Victims must also recognize the psychological tactics used to keep them trapped. Among the most devastating is gaslighting, which makes the victim question their own perception of reality. When someone tells you repeatedly, "That never happened," or "You're imagining things," your mind begins to doubt itself. Over time, this weakens your confidence so severely that you begin to rely on the narcissist as the sole interpreter of reality. For the narcissist, this is the ultimate victory, to rewrite reality itself. The pleasure they derive from such control is profound because it confirms their godlike illusion of being the authority over truth. Another tactic is triangulation. A narcissist might introduce a third person into the dynamic, an ex-partner, a friend, or even a stranger, to make the victim feel insecure or jealous. By comparing or hinting at alternatives, they keep the victim competing for approval. The victim's anxiety becomes fuel for the narcissist's pleasure because it proves their ability to manipulate emotions at will. Yet despite this facade of power, it is crucial to see the underlying fragility. Narcissists control because they are terrified of being controlled. They dominate because they are terrified of being abandoned. They manipulate because they are terrified of being exposed as inadequate. This is the paradox at the core of narcissism. The stronger they appear, the weaker they actually are. Their pleasure in controlling others is simply the mask they wear to hide their fear. For those who have suffered under such control, the most powerful realization is this: the narcissist's behavior is not about your weakness, but about their wound. Recognizing this allows you to separate your identity from their manipulation. You are not defined by their control. Their need to dominate is a reflection of their brokenness, not your worth. This truth must be internalized through affirmations, repeated until it becomes part of your inner reality. One such affirmation could be, "I am not here to be controlled. I am here to live freely, with dignity and strength. Their need for control is not my responsibility." Speaking these words consistently weakens the invisible chains and strengthens the inner resolve to resist manipulation. The path out of narcissistic control is not easy. It requires awareness, boundaries, and often external support. But understanding the psychology behind why a narcissist feels pleasure in control is a powerful first step. By unveiling their mechanisms, we take away part of their power. Knowledge becomes a form of liberation, a weapon that transforms confusion into clarity and fear into determination. The narcissist's pursuit of control cannot be understood only as an individual issue. It is also relational, systemic, and social. Their pleasure in controlling others extends beyond intimate partnerships into friendships, families, workplaces, and even larger communities. Wherever there is an opportunity to manipulate, dominate, or shape the perceptions of others, the narcissist feels an irresistible pull. To them, life itself becomes a stage where they must constantly ensure they remain at the center, admired and obeyed. One of the most revealing aspects of narcissistic control is how it erodes identity in their victims. At the beginning of a relationship, the victim may be confident, independent, and self-aware. Over time, however, the constant criticism, manipulation, and gaslighting wear down their sense of self. Slowly, the victim begins to internalize the narcissist's voice as if it were their own. They second-guess decisions, doubt their abilities, and rely increasingly on the narcissist's approval. For the narcissist, this erosion of individuality is deeply pleasurable because it represents the ultimate form of dominance, not only controlling external behavior, but shaping the internal world of another human being. The narcissist's ability to rewrite reality is not accidental. It is the culmination of repeated strategies designed to weaken resistance. They isolate their victims from support systems so that alternative perspectives are unavailable. They alternate between warmth and cruelty so that the victim clings to moments of affection, hoping they will return. They project their flaws onto others, making the victim feel guilty for problems they did not cause. Over time, the victim becomes entangled in a web of confusion, unable to distinguish their own thoughts and feelings from the imposed narrative. This psychological entanglement is what allows the narcissist to derive maximum satisfaction. The victim no longer resists because they cannot even see the chains. Control also provides the narcissist with a distorted sense of intimacy. Because they fear genuine vulnerability, they cannot form connections based on mutual trust and respect. Instead, they replace intimacy with dominance. To them, closeness means possession, love means obedience, loyalty means submission. The pleasure they experience in controlling others is, in a sense, their substitute for authentic human connection. It is tragic because while they achieve domination, they never experience the depth of real intimacy. Their pleasure is shallow, temporary, and ultimately unfulfilling, but it is the only form of closeness they know. From a philosophical perspective, Carl Jung's concept of the shadow is central here. The narcissist is unwilling to confront their shadow, the parts of themselves that are weak, insecure, or vulnerable. By refusing to face these aspects, they project them onto others. The victim becomes the weak one, the dependent one, the confused one. In controlling the victim, the narcissist avoids confronting their own brokenness. The pleasure they feel is the pleasure of escape from their own shadow. But the escape is temporary, and the shadow remains, growing stronger the longer it is denied. This projection mechanism explains why narcissists often accuse their victims of the very behaviors they themselves commit. They may call their partner controlling, selfish, or manipulative, when in fact they are describing their own actions. By shifting blame, they preserve the illusion of superiority and keep the victim trapped in self-doubt. Each successful projection is another victory, another moment of pleasure, because it confirms their ability to redefine reality in their favor. Yet the narcissist's control has consequences not only for their victims, but also for themselves. Every act of domination deepens their dependence on external validation. The more they control, the more they need to control. Their inner emptiness is never filled, only temporarily numbed. In this sense, they are addicts to power, attention, and manipulation. Like any addiction, the high fades quickly, leaving them restless, irritable, and desperate for more. Their victims suffer greatly, but the narcissist too lives in chains, unable to escape the cycle of hunger and dissatisfaction. For victims, understanding this cycle is critical. When you see that the narcissist's pleasure is born of their wound, not your inadequacy, you begin to reclaim your power. Their control does not define you. Their manipulation does not reflect your worth. Their need to dominate is their prison, not your truth. The act of naming these dynamics breaks the spell of confusion and brings clarity. With clarity comes strength, and with strength comes the possibility of freedom. Practical strategies emerge from this awareness. Boundaries become essential. A narcissist will test every limit, push against every line, and exploit every weakness. Clear and firm boundaries disrupt their cycle of control. Support systems, friends, family, therapists, provide alternative perspectives that counteract the narcissist's narrative. Documentation of events helps ground the victim in reality when gaslighting attempts to distort it. Above all, cultivating inner affirmations strengthens the victim's sense of identity. I have the right to my thoughts, my feelings, and my truth. Their control is not my destiny. The journey away from narcissistic control is often long and painful, but it is also transformative. Victims who reclaim their power often discover a depth of resilience and wisdom they never knew they possessed. They learn to trust themselves again, to honor their boundaries, and to seek relationships rooted in respect rather than dominance. In this sense, the narcissist's attempt to enslave them can become, paradoxically, the catalyst for their liberation. Ultimately, the question of why a narcissist feels pleasure in controlling their victims reveals a profound paradox. Their dominance is a disguise for their fragility, and their pleasure is inseparable from their pain. They may appear powerful, but their power is hollow, dependent entirely on others. The real strength belongs not to the narcissist, but to those who awaken, resist, and reclaim their freedom. The narcissist's greatest fear is not losing control of others. It is that others will see the truth. Beneath the mask of power lies a desperate, frightened child, still searching for the love they never received. And so the final affirmation stands clear and strong. Their pleasure in control is not my burden to carry. I release their grip, I reclaim my life, and I step into a freedom they will never know.